The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
At that time, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman of that district came and called out, "Have pity on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But Jesus did not say a word in answer to her. Jesus' disciples came and asked him, "Send her away, for she keeps calling out after us." He said in reply, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But the woman came and did Jesus homage, saying, "Lord, help me." He said in reply, "It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters." Then Jesus said to her in reply, "O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And the woman's daughter was healed from that hour. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
For many of us, the most rewarding and perhaps the most difficult job we will ever have in life is that of being a parent, or God willing, becoming a grandparent, or even a great-grandparent. I remember the day my wife Mary and I headed toward Riverview Medical Center in Red Bank to deliver our firstborn son, John Paul. It was a time in our lives that was filled with great excitement, and yet there was some trepidation since the OBGYN told us of his growing concern that our baby was now well over 3 weeks past due. Once we arrived at the hospital and got her settled in her room, the doctor came in and got right down to business. He rattled off a number of possible medical complications and then said, "If the baby doesn't arrive sometime this evening, we're going to go with Plan B, a C-section." With an immediate disregard for Plan B, my wife insisted on the more traditional Plan A. And feeling like a little bit like Ray Barone at that moment, I considered the option of getting a few spicy tacos or a McRib sandwich to accelerate the delivery process. And again, something in my brain told me that to verbally make such a proposal could be hazardous to my health. So we waited for nature to run its course. About 3 a.m., nature was right on time. My wife delivered a 9 3/4 pound baby boy. Seconds later, our joy turned into shock. There was a problem. The doctor didn't place my son into my wife's arms to hold. Instead, he moved the baby to another area of the delivery room, and in hushed sounds dictated a number of instructions to the nurses. One nurse got on the phone and called for a neurologist. Once my wife heard that word, she knew something was very wrong and decided she was going to get up and see what was going on. With that, the doctor shouted, "Don't you dare get off that table." About this time, I got a glimpse of John Paul's right arm. It was dark in color, and it appeared smaller than his left arm as it was twisted around his head. More doctors entered the room, and while the nurses wheeled my wife's gurney from the delivery back to her own room, my mind could barely process what just happened. This didn't make any sense. When we got back to her room, we met another new mother in the adjacent bed who also gave birth that same night to a baby boy named David. Minutes later, our doctor came in to provide us with an update on John Paul's condition. He said, "I'm afraid the umbilical cord has been twisted around your son's arm for quite some time. His arm may have nerve damage and limited movement. After the neurologist finishes performing some tests, we'll have a better idea as to how much damage occurred. Now that kind of news will make any parent weak. And no sooner did our doctor leave than the other mom's doctor rushed into the room to announce that her newborn son had a hole in his heart and had to be airlifted immediately to Deborah Hospital. She started to cry as her husband packed their things, and in 5 minutes they were gone for Deborah. My wife and I stared at each other. How could such a happy moment in our lives turn into such horror for two families? Finally, I said, "There's a 7 a.m. Mass at St. James in Red Bank. I must go and pray for John Paul and David. God can do anything, and we need 2 miracles about this time." My wife agreed, and then she gave me a rather stern look. She said, "Don't you dare come back without those 2 miracles." Her words rang in my ears. I traveled across to St. James Church and made it with minutes to spare. And when the time came for the prayer of the faithful, I blurted out my request for 2 miracles. The priest patiently waited while 5 nuns that happened to be sitting right behind me started to all pray out loud for John Paul and David. This continued for a time, and then the Mass continued. After Mass, I returned to the hospital just in time to console my wife as the neurologist entered into her room to give us a report. He said, "I just finished checking John Paul's arm, and I can find nothing wrong. His arm looks perfectly normal and healthy. His reflexes are perfect. I see nothing that requires any specialized treatment." Days later, we would also learn that David's open heart surgery was also unnecessary. The hole had closed all by itself on the way to Deborah Hospital. Our 2 families stayed in touch for the next 20 years. And I'm happy to report that as a teenager, David turned out to be an excellent athlete with no heart problems. And John Paul enjoys great dexterity with both arms and hands even to this day. I firmly believe that God answered our prayer that day, and I also thank God for his gift of skilled doctors, nurses, and all the technology that we're so blessed to have in our country. Now, some might hear this story and discount it as a coincidence, but many doctors will tell us there are times when they see medical cures that defy all the rules of medical science, and therein lies our faith. To believe that Jesus can directly and instantaneously perform miracles in our day just as he did 2,000 years ago. Now, let us consider the gospel story we just heard. The story takes place in a land called Phoenicia. It's an area just northwest of Israel that is located along the Mediterranean Sea and includes the port cities of Tyre and Sidon. The Gentile people who lived there were called Canaanites, since they were not part of Israel. Now, since the Jews considered themselves the chosen people, they believed that they were the only ones who could be saved. In contrast, Canaanites were considered unclean from birth, a people so abominable before the Lord that it would be acceptable under Jewish law to destroy a Canaanite by the sword. The rabbis knew they couldn't kill all the heathens, so they wanted the Jews to avoid the Canaanites, lest they lead a Jew into idolatry or trick a Jew into providing aid that might help a Canaanite in their heathen worship. Even walking on Canaanite land was considered unclean for a Jew. Then we learn that Jesus and his disciples enter and travel many miles into the center of this pagan land. Just imagine what his disciples must have thought as he led them into unclean territory. The news traveled quickly, and it didn't take long for a Canaanite woman to hear that Jesus was walking through her district. The woman, a mother, was worried sick over her daughter, a girl who was possessed and tormented by a demon. Yet even though this woman was a Canaanite, she believed God's promise toward Israel and how Jesus demonstrated God's power by performing extraordinary healings everywhere he went. Wasting no time, she set out to find Jesus. And when she saw him, she yelled out, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me. My daughter is tormented by a demon." Everyone in that place fell silent. Jesus was silent. His disciples were silent. The Canaanites must have thought, "Is this woman crazy? What will happen if one of those Jews, or even perhaps Jesus himself, attacks this woman? If that happens, she has no chance to escape." Finally, the disciples broke the silence and asked Jesus to send this woman away because of her constant shouting was annoying them. Jesus turned and looked at the woman as he explains that he was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And recognizing that Jesus was her only hope, the woman decides to risk it all. She stood before Jesus, and then she prostrated herself low to the ground, making herself completely vulnerable as she says, "Lord, help me." 3 small words. With total faith and humility, the woman put her very life in the hands of Jesus. Nowhere else does Scripture record anyone saying to the Lord, "Lord, help me." And to everyone's astonishment, Jesus responds, "O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done as you wish." And at that very moment, her daughter was healed. My brothers and sisters, there are times in our lives when we don't have an answer, when a life event or difficulty so overpowers us that we are faced with a choice to give up or to exercise our faith and to surrender to God's power, love, and mercy. The Canaanite woman chose to put her most difficult problem in the hands of Jesus. And her example, along with her answered prayer, is a teaching moment for us who are here today. Do we dare ask Jesus for help in our impossible situation? Or do we find ourselves hesitate and rely on solutions that can only be found in the world? And so today, we have a dramatic example of faith demonstrated by a pagan woman living in a faraway land. And we also heard a modern-day example where a young Catholic family took immediate action to demonstrate their faith in Jesus to resolve a crisis in their lives. Scripture teaches us that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And if that be true, then Jesus continues to perform miracles in our day. Do we really believe this? Pray God the answer is yes. The choice is ours to make.